I do think that the business of healthcare would collapse if you did not have what is used informal caregivers. I really think it would collapse because so much of care is happening in the home. And enabling that family care partner, caregiver to manage what is going on, to anticipate the needs, to stay organized, and to reduce the burden is absolutely critical. And that's why the Manta platform comes in.
In the Cancer Caregiver podcast, I'm joined by Samira Daswani, the founder and CEO of Manta Cares and host of the podcast Patient from Hell. If you haven't come across it yet, Manta Cares is a free patient-first navigation platform designed to bring order to one of the most overwhelming experiences a family can face. It offers visual cancer maps, symptom and medication tracking tools, appointment planning support, and access to evidence-based resources, all created by people who've been through cancer themselves and validated by leading oncologists. It's a platform built to help patients and caregivers stay organized, make informed decisions, and feel less alone in a system that often leaves them to figure everything out on their own. Samira brings the lived experience of a survivor, the eye of a designer, and the clarity of someone who has spent years studying how patients and families actually move through care. I'm really grateful to have you here, Samira. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
When I was going through history of the things that you've done and all the projects that you've worked on, I was really interested in knowing what was the moment when your cancer experience shifted from a personal crisis to a decision to redesign the system, because this is coming out of your own experience of having cancer yourself.
I think the moment that shifted for me was relatively early in the experience. I remember sitting in the waiting room during my first cycle of chemotherapy, and my hair had started falling out, and it was a summer, and I live in California, so it was hot. And I walk up to the receptionist, and she hands me this box and goes, "Another patient's mom knit these things for you, y'all. And if you want one, it's yours." And it's this like woolen hat. And it's like, I don't know, 100 degrees Fahrenheit outside. But the thing was, I was really cold. And I remember getting that hat, and I remember starting to cry because I realized that there was someone else who had gone through this, who had anticipated this moment. And I didn't even know I needed a hat. I didn't know I was going to be cold. And someone had thought about it and given me this thing. And I remember going home after that cycle of chemo, and I remember thinking, being like, I can't knit. That's not my deal. But that lived experience allows you to anticipate needs that others might have. And what was my way of giving back to that community? So that was sort of the initial decision.
I love that. It's really interesting to see how people take what they're going through and have that moment where it leads them to do something bigger that they weren't even expecting to do and probably would have never thought of doing unless they had that experience. And you described your cancer experience as a treacherous hike with no map or gear or guide. When you began building Manta Cares, what did you discover that even you didn't realize patients and caregivers needed?
So I, as a background, I'm a bioengineer, and I had worked in oncology 2 times before being a patient. And when I got diagnosed, I think I went through something not a lot of people went through, which was I kind of knew the data. I was like, okay, all right, early stage breast cancer, the odds are I'm going to live through this. So I don't think I had the, oh my God, I'm not going to survive this reaction that I know a lot of patients have. But in that same vein, I also didn't appreciate how much burden that was about to be on me and my family. I should say my family too, because the reality is I'm incredibly privileged, and my family showed up in full force. My mom flew in from India, my dad flew in, my siblings showed up, my now husband was there, and I'm a nerd, which meant that we read everything, and my family had roles and things were organized. But despite all of that, it was really hard. And in looking back, the hardest moment was one that we didn't really know where we were on this multi-year experience. And we had no way
Mm.
of anticipating what's next. And that is something that I've realized that pretty much every other cancer patient and family goes through. And the reality behind that is we are sitting at a point in time where oncology has gotten very optimistic. We have so
Right.
many new treatments today. We have more treatments today than we've ever had in the history of humanity. We've added 300 new treatments in the last 5 years. That's a lot.
Mm.
But what's also happened is it's gotten very complex because now you as a patient need to navigate that effectively dynamic scenario, and it's changing every month. So as a patient, understanding where you are and understanding and anticipating that, in the next month, I'm going to have to make 2 or 3 decisions, that gap
Mhm.
is pervasive. And that's the gap that I began to realize when we were going through treatment. And that's effectively why I ended up building Manta.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that are listening to this probably really can be in that place with you, because I know even my experience with cancer, there have been times where my husband has gone into the oncologist and the plan was what it was 6 months ago. But then 6 months later, we go in and the plan is completely changed just because the the plan needed to be changed based on the evidence of studies that had just come out or changes in protocols that had happened, that in the oncologist's office by the time we got there was just commonplace, and we're being hit with it without having any ability to actually have the idea that things are going to be different and have a way to kind of sit with it before having to make decisions and choices, where then the oncologist is like, yeah, we're going to do this, and we're like, but wait, I thought the plan was if A happened, then B would follow. And now you're saying it's C instead. And they're like, well, we found a better way. And it's not that ever an oncologist can say, we found a better way. And you're like, absolutely not. It's just, I haven't had a chance to wrap my head around it. And now this is the next normal thing for you guys, but it's completely off the path for us, because there are sometimes also big gaps in between when you see your team. And so are you able to adjust and update in real time?
The map is adjusted and updated in real time. So we update in a couple of different dimensions. We update, of course, with new therapies coming to market. We update with changes in guidelines. We also update resources. So whenever a patient or
Mm.
family finds something that we weren't aware of, we will update the map to reflect that as well. We also update the platform to reflect new financial support services in particular, because you can imagine that that's an area that is a huge unmet need for the population. So the platform is
Mm-hmm.
updated every week, every other week, pretty frequently.
Wow. And are there specific cancers that the map speaks to right now, or are they all cancers? Because I can imagine that's a big endeavor.
We are fully live in breast cancer and lung cancer. We are
Okay.
working our way through prostate. We're going to start colorectal and multiple myeloma.
Okay. Wow. A lot of updating in the future. And I feel like one of the things that I realized with going through your published studies is that you found that people often don't even know their stage, their mutation status, or even, what comes next based on that information. So, what did that research teach you about the emotional realities of navigating cancer?
One is the reality of people who get cancer, right? 4 in 10 people in our lifetime are going to end up getting cancer. And it's almost, and I say this a little carefully because I think you could argue your way out of this, but it almost affects regardless of gender, regardless of age, regardless of demographic, and regardless of ethnicity. and race.
Uh-huh.
I say that to say that cancer really, in some ways, doesn't discriminate in terms of who it affects. However, your background, of course, determines how much of a starter you get in
Mhm.
the first few weeks. What I have learned though is when you get diagnosed, regardless of your background and regardless of your privilege, these are some of the most activated people you will ever meet. People will do
Mhm.
just about anything to learn, to get smart, to get the right resources. They tap into their community. People are really trying to get the best care. What I found though is that there really isn't tools built to help patients. We just haven't given us tools. You end up relying on Google, you rely on ChatGPT, you rely on the resources you can access. And there, I think, is where the gap is in the space. And that's the gap I'm trying to have Manta start to fill a little bit at least, is to get you started. Because today what's happening is it's affecting everybody. And everybody is very motivated to learn. But we're not making it, we're not helping you learn. We're not helping you get smart. We're like, yeah, you're getting smart, good for you. And you're like, give me
Right.
more.
Well, and also there's so many of your experiences that are informing just the creation of this map. And I know that you've talked about in past conversations and interviews that, when you grew up in India, people sometimes weren't even told that they have cancer, and how taboo, shapes who gets information. I know I've had conversations with different people who felt like they couldn't tell family members um, when they were diagnosed because of stigma or just the way their culture was formed. It made it way more difficult than a lot of people can imagine, just being able to tell someone that you'd been diagnosed. And so, how does that reality show up in the way you write copy and design flows or choose the visuals for Manta Care? Because I know even anything that we do has at least a little bit of our DNA in it, right? So I was just wondering, when you were putting this together, how much of you is in there?
Such a good question. There's probably a yes and to that. So the most important thing for me is I say this about Manta, we're shamelessly patient first. I say that to say that yes, there is some DNA of me in the ethos of the company, in the ethos of the organization, but we really listen. And the listening to patients is what drives basically every single change we make in the company. And I say that across the board because in healthcare, we've gotten to a point where patient centered is kind of parcel to the language and the mission of
Yeah.
pretty much anybody working in healthcare. And what we have found is that you almost have to sometimes sacrifice the organization side of it in order to deliver patient first. And I say that to say that I'll give an example of this, and this goes back to, in some ways, your question around what is the DNA that I have in here. I made the first planner for myself, the paper planner. We started with the paper product. I came back from my second cycle of chemo and I was like, this is too much. I need control. So I designed this very, honestly, very nerdy paper planner. And it's a planner. It's not education. It's helps me keep track of notes in my appointment, helps me track my symptoms, helps
Right.
me manage the 15,000 questions floating in my head and the 19,000 appointments I have. So I made that for myself. And I had extra copies, and the planner was called Cancer Planner, something cancer treatment. And someone gets their hands on one of the planners, and I get a call. And this patient is sitting halfway across the country and says, "Hey, Samira, I love this product. I want more, but I need you to do me a favor." I was like, "Sure, what?" She goes, "Can you please change the cover?" I was like,
Mm.
"Why?" She goes, hey, it says the word cancer, but I am walking around with this planner in my bag. If I go to work and I by mistake take the planner out and put it on the desk, I have now disclosed to my employer that I am dealing with cancer. And I may not want to do that.
Right.
And it was a very profound moment for me because I remember then looking at pretty much any product we get our hands on, ribbons, bald heads,
Right.
heads and scarves,
Mm-hmm.
brochures in the world of breast cancer. It's pink everything. Now, not everything,
Yeah.
pink mostly everything.
Yeah.
Different cancers have different colors. And I remember going around being like, oh shit, wait a minute, hold on.
Yeah.
This woman's right. Like, there's nothing that I can buy that doesn't have cancer visual imagery, language, very visible. All of this to say that that's what got us to change the name. That's why you'll
Okay.
see Manta Cares never, we don't, there's no cancer in there. There's no ribbon. There's no
Mm-hmm.
head. We've stayed away from imagery like that because we want to give people the option of disclosing when and if they want to.
Right.
And the reason Manta is I love scuba diving and I love fish, and we are named for fish.
I love that you were able to take that input and actually take a step back and see how just even the design, which may have just felt like it made sense, was because everything that has to do with cancer is associated with a color or has the name cancer on it. And you know, I'm with that person. Like, sometimes I want something that is a cancer-based product, but I don't want it to scream cancer all over the place too. So I love that you were able to take that input and you know, think about the design when you're designing it. And starting with the planner is really good because I feel like you know, having a place to start and having people reach out to you and say, "Oh, I got my hands on this thing that you create." You know, it's almost like you were not on purpose, just like product testing this resource, and because you've always been clear that you know Manta Cares isn't just a digital tool, that it's more. It's like a patient first infrastructure, and it's like that's what your focus is on. But, you know, when you're starting to bring something to market, I can understand that there's some hard and important decisions to make. And so I'm just wondering, you know, what does patient first look like in a world where funding and partnerships and incentives often push founders in the opposite direction they really wanted to go to?
It's a very good question. And there's a practical answer and there's a philosophical answer. And I'll give you the practical answer first, where we at Manta essentially have a set of values and operating principles. And top of that list is how you make decisions. And for us, how we make decisions across the board, what goes into the product, what funding we're going to take, who we're going to collaborate with, everything has to pass the muster of, is this in the best interest of the patient? And if it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't pass that threshold, we won't do it. And that bar is maintained from the board all the way to every single person who is working with us, either full time or in some partnership capacity. And we have actually walked away from collaborations that don't meet that threshold. And it's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard to do that. But what I have found is by us maintaining that in a really weird way, organizations that you wouldn't fully expect to meet that bar actually meet that bar. And they want
Okay.
to do right. And I have been truly
Mhm.
pleasantly surprised at the number of individuals we have had the fortune of meeting who are wanting to do the right thing and almost leverage the Manta platform and ethos to help them do the right thing. And that I think has been really rewarding for me because philosophically, I was super nervous. I was like, oh man, it's gonna be hard. And in some ways, it really hasn't. In some ways, it's been
Uh-huh.
really, really easy. It just requires us to like dig our heels and be like, nope, sorry, not doing it.
Yeah.
People change, and you're like, okay, all right.
That has to be hard to do, especially when you're in this phase of the business that you're in, and really wanting to make a difference, but wanting to do it the way that fits the values that all of you have put together. So it does take a lot of strength and conviction to be able to say no and walk away from, maybe a deal that would have brought something to fruition faster, right? And so that's really admirable because I don't know that all companies are able to do that. Um, and it's you trying to work within a system, right? And you've mentioned that, the medical system is working exactly as it was designed, and it's just not designed for patients. So when you zoom out, what is this system actually optimizing for, and how does Manta Cares intentionally break that pattern?
The system in healthcare is really designed, at least in the US, very US centric answer here. But in the US, healthcare is a business. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
Insurance companies, it's a business. Pharma companies, it's a business. Hospital systems, it's a business. Now, they may be a nonprofit, but it's still a business. So at the end of the day,
Right.
things that drive the economics of these organizations is what decisions are made on. And
Mm-hmm.
what that usually, I'm overly simplifying this a little bit, but what that usually means is throughput. You just need a certain volume through your system, and you need a certain set of financial incentives that you're optimizing around.
Right.
That's just true of healthcare. And I think
Mm-hmm.
most companies, and I've done digital health my entire career, and pretty much every other company I've been at, you start there, right? You start with the economics and then back into the product. With Manta, because of the way we ended up building the product, we ended up having a 3-year window where we were just building the product for patients. There was no financial incentives because we hadn't even decided we were going to become an organization. So what happened is that the DNA of this company really started patient first, right? So we spent 3+ years essentially listening to patients and really understanding. And I say patients, I don't just mean patients, family members, because in so many cases, it really is the caregiver that is taking on the burden. And for us, understanding both sides of it was crucial. And because we were able to do that for 3 years, I think we were able to build a platform that is really designed for patients, full stop. And then we found derivatives of that to help their business side of it, but it's a derivative versus the designed intent.
So when you talk to caregivers, how did you envision, even though this is essentially, it's driven for cancer patients to figure out how to continue on the path, right? But you saw when you were reaching out to patients that there's almost always maybe someone right next to them or helping set up any answers that were being attended to. How do you see it making that invisible caregiver load a little bit lighter?
So we have designed the platform for both patients and care partners out the gate, actually. And even today, a caregiver can come into the platform, they have their own account, because what we found is that some patients usually have someone else in the appointment with them, but it's not always that the patient has the caregiver with them in the appointment. So what ends up happening is that the caregiver actually is seeing a fragmented picture of what is being communicated to the patient. So the need to understand where you are or where your patient is and what to anticipate next is actually in some ways higher or more for the caregiver than for the patient because the patient is consistently in the appointment. So for that reason, we from the get-go have been patient caregiver, patient caregiver. What we have found is that depending on the type of cancer, the role of the caregiver starts to shift a little bit. Early stage breast cancer, patients are very activated. The patient themselves is very activated, usually. I'm making
Mm-hmm.
broad generalizations here, guys.
Right.
But what I found in metastatic lung cancer, the role of the caregiver is much more prominent. They tend to be
Okay.
more active. They tend to be more loud. They tend to be both genders. Both men and women caregivers show
Yeah.
up in kind of full force on the lung cancer side of the house. And we're seeing different patterns across different types of cancers. And I say that
Mm-hmm.
because if you think about the eventual impact of the platform on a caregiver, for the caregiver, for me, reducing caregiver burnout is critical. Because
Right.
I think you use the words invisible burden. I think that's really, really well put because the burden is invisible. And I do think that the business of healthcare would collapse if you did not have what is used informal caregivers. I really think it would collapse because so much of care is happening in the home. And enabling that family care partner, caregiver to manage what is going on, to anticipate the needs, to stay organized, and to reduce the burden is absolutely critical. And that's why the Manta platform comes in.
And taking all of the information, I love, like, I could have a whole conversation about the different ways caregivers are enacted based on the cancer. But we can save that for a different conversation. Uh, but because you do a lot of studies and you're very methodical about really being able to meet the patient and their families where they are. And what I found interesting is you had an abstract for ASCO this year, and it said that you saw an average of 16.7 support services connected per user, but only 3% of eligible users actually were connected with a nurse, which I found interesting. Even though you're working on researching to provide this service, it is to connect them in some way to the people that they can go to for the support that they need. But what does that tell you, the gap about where humans still need humans in this navigation?
No, I looked at our, because we pulled that data a couple of months ago. So I actually went back in and looked at our data as of this morning, and it's still about 3%, which is
Wow.
not super surprising to me. When we think about access, I think and I'm now talking healthcare ecosystem broadly, access is very often considered financial. We tend to forget that a lot of patients and families are working. And
Yeah.
we tend to forget that like most of healthcare is happening 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the vast majority of support service is available 9 to 5. And if you look at
Yeah.
activities of when patients are creating accounts, when are they coming online, when are they coming back in, it's usually in the night.
Okay.
And it's usually happening, and I jokingly say this: the demons of cancer come out after dark.
Yeah. 2 o'clock in the morning.
2 o'clock in the morning. Having been there a few times, 2 o'clock in the morning is pretty consistent. Yes, 2 o'clock in the morning. But it's really hard to provide support services at 2 in the morning. It's really hard
Yeah.
because that's a hard nut to crack because that means you need to have a nurse available at 2 in the morning. And what we
Mm-hmm.
found is that very, very often access kind of shows up in dimensions like that. And that's where
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually super hopeful for AI. I'm like, yes, because now
Yeah.
it can give you some 24/7 coverage, right? It may not be perfect, but hopefully it's available at that 2 in the morning. I am absolutely alone, family member or patient, because it happens on both sides. What do I do? Who do I talk to? How do I navigate the situation? And that then hopefully gives you enough coverage to that when you need that human, hopefully the need is lower and the time spent with that human navigator is better.
Feel like you see hope in the future for some kind of resolution for now, for the people that are not able to go to sleep or looking for answers when there's not a human that they can reach out to, which is a hard place to be in, quite frankly. And as you're studying these patterns, and as you've spent years mapping the cancer journey, if a future patient had access to the fully realized Manta Cares ecosystem, what's the emotional difference you hope they feel compared to your own experience?
For me, there are a few emotions in there. The feeling of control. I think control is honestly, it's taken away from you when you get diagnosed, giving you a little bit more agency, giving you a little bit more confidence. And the confidence manifests itself both in like, I am confident at getting the right care. I'm confident advocating for myself. I am confident that I can manage the impact of cancer on my life and my family. So confidence for me is big. On the caregiver side, I am organized. I think that's a big gap that I see in caregivers is that there's just a lot. Right? You're juggling a lot of things, and there isn't a place for you to stay organized on top of the 50,000 things. A little less anxious, and honestly, for both groups, just a little easier.
Well, we are getting really close to that, I feel. And it's just adding on different modalities for different types of cancers so that we can get more people to be able to have the opportunity to feel that way. So, talking about the future, right? If you had unlimited funding to solve just one equity problem in cancer navigation globally, not just here, which I know is a big question to ask because healthcare systems are different throughout the world. What problem would you choose and how would you attack it?
I think I would choose the same problem we're solving right now. I want to make sure when you get diagnosed, you should get access to a map so you know where you are and you can anticipate what's next. Because knowing where you are in a multi-month, multi-year, sometimes multi-decade experience that is so, so important for you to do just about anything else on top of it. Because without that, you can't really participate in the decision making that happens. And the average patient has 300 to 500 decisions. So I want to make sure that we can help you start to understand what they are. And as they're coming up, you are better prepared to be a participant in it alongside your doctor.
Everyone being able to have the information that they need to be able to feel like they're informed enough to be able to at least ask the questions that will get them the information that they want. Because sometimes, even not even knowing the questions that you want to ask or framing what is in your head outwardly with words that make sense and are coherent for an oncologist or for a nurse to be able to answer, sometimes that's a big roadblock in the beginning to try to get over. Before we go, one last question for the person that's listening to you right now. What message would you like for them to carry with them for the rest of the day?
We recorded an episode this morning on exercise and the importance of exercise and using that
Hmm.
to manage side effects and symptoms and things like that. The message I would leave you with is what I got from our guest, and it's stuck in my head, which is if you survived chemo, a squat is not going to kill you.
Right. That's a good way to put things into perspective. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being on here with me. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to how much Manta Cares is going to continue to grow and continue to listen to episodes of the Patient from Hell, your podcast. Thank you for giving me your time today.
Thank you, Charlotte. I appreciate you.